on one of the bloodiest days in human history, as Mongol warriors slaughtered hundreds of thousands in Baghdad, one group was mysteriously spared: Christians. Their doors marked, their lives protected by a Christian queen married to the Mongol Khan. But this mercy would become a curse, because 40 years later, the very forces they helped unleash would hunt them to near extinction. Most people know about Catholics and Orthodox Christians. But there was a third Christian superpower you've probably never heard of: the Nestorian Church, also called the Church of the East. While Rome and Constantinople fought over Europe, the Nestorians quietly built the largest Christian empire by geography the world had ever seen. From Mesopotamia to Mongolia, from India to China, they stretched across continents. Between the 9th and 14th centuries, they were Christianity's silent giant. Both Rome and Constantinople declared them heretics. In 431 AD, the Nestorians were officially condemned and exiled. They were Christians that other Christians hated. While Western Christians were launching crusades, the Nestorians were doing something far more strategic. They were converting Mongols. In 1007, an entire Mongol tribe, the Karaits, converted to Christianity. 200,000 people in one day. And when a young warrior named Temujin united the Mongol tribes and became Genghis Khan, he did something crucial. He married his sons to Christian Karaite princesses. Sorghaghtani Beki, a Nestorian Christian, became mother to 3 great Khans. Doquz Khatun, another Nestorian, married Hulagu Khan, who would conquer Persia. Even Hulagu's top general, Kitbuka, was a Nestorian Christian. This wasn't just tolerance. Christianity was woven into Mongol power itself. Here's where it gets interesting. Starting in 1223, 35 years before Baghdad would fall, Franciscan missionaries began traveling east. In 1240, Pope Gregory IX sent Dominican missionaries to Georgia. When Georgia submitted to the Mongols in 1243, these missionaries spent 5 years in close contact with them, studying their psychology and reporting it all back to the Western churches. In 1245, Pope Innocent IV sent not 1, but 4 separate diplomatic missions to the Mongol court, until the Mongols forgot their original mission was to unite the Christian world. By 1248, Mongol envoys were openly discussing their plans to conquer Baghdad with King Louis IX of France. The Western churches knew if their scheme works, they'll eliminate 2 rivals with 1 war. They knew what was coming. They knew the Nestorians held massive influence, and they did nothing to warn anyone. For 500 years, Baghdad was the beating heart of human civilization. The Abbasid Caliphate presided over the golden age of Baghdad. While Europe languished in the Dark Ages, Baghdad had hospitals, universities, and 36 public libraries. The House of Wisdom held knowledge from across the known world. 1 million people called it home. It was untouchable, or so they thought. Hulagu Khan arrived with 150,000 warriors, 1 out of every 10 fighting men in the entire Mongol Empire. But this wasn't just Mongols. Large contingents of Georgian Christians and Armenian Christians marched with them. General Kitbuka, a Nestorian Christian, commanded key forces, and accompanying the army was Doquz Khatun, Hulagu's Nestorian Christian wife. The Caliph refused to surrender. It was a fatal mistake. On February 13, 1258, the Mongols entered Baghdad. What followed was apocalyptic. Men, women, children, slaughtered without mercy. Libraries burned, hospitals destroyed. The Tigris River reportedly ran black with ink from destroyed books, then red with blood. Estimates range from 200,000 to 800,000 dead. Christians of Baghdad. Doquz Khatun personally interceded for them. Their doors were marked, their lives protected. Hulagu even gave the royal palace to the Nestorian patriarch and ordered a cathedral built. Armenian historians recorded that Christians in Hulagu's army took special pleasure in Baghdad's destruction. But why? Nestorian Church was Middle Eastern, and so it was perfect for propaganda use. Muslims destroyed the Nestorian Church and took their land. It wasn't the Western churches who oppressed the Nestorian Church of the Middle East. It's on you, Mongol Nestorians, to restore your brethren. Brilliant strategy. Step back and look at the picture. They take Armenia heading west, then a full stop in Georgia, followed by a 90-degree course change as soon as Franciscans get involved. To every Muslim watching, this looked like a Christian holy war. The Nestorians were now the visible face of Christianity's alliance with the Mongol conquerors. But there was a problem. The Mongol advance stalled after Baghdad. Most forces withdrew, the campaign bogged down, and something unexpected was brewing. Ghazan Khan, Hulagu's great-grandson, did something that would change everything. He converted to Islam. The Mongols who had destroyed the caliphate now fought for Islam. Jihad replaced Mongol preferential treatment of Christians. And the Nestorians? Overnight, they lost all imperial protection. The Nestorians had helped destroy Muslim Baghdad. Now their Muslim Mongol progeny remembered. Churches that dotted Central Asia for centuries were burned. Monks were massacred. Communities scattered. They were hit by not just persecution, but also a plague. One can argue the magnitude of the plague was clear sign of divine retribution. They were left in total isolation from their mother church. Then came Tamerlane. Educated in his nation's history, he realized the game that was played on the Mongols. He wanted revenge for the years of propaganda used on sincere Mongols seeking the truth and the way of Christ. Tamerlane was a Mongol Muslim warrior who used the same brutal tactics as Genghis Khan, but now in the name of Islam. He specifically targeted Christians, Armenians, Georgians, and especially Nestorians. Entire communities were wiped out. Those who survived often converted to Islam just to escape the stigma of being Christian. A church that once stretched from Iraq to China, from India to Mongolia, that had survived for over 1,000 years, nearly extinct in just 150 years. This was clearly a mission accomplished. The scheme of the Western churches did at least eliminate their Christian rivals from the East. Today, only small pockets remain. Assyrian Christians in Iraq, scattered communities in India, the survivors of a forgotten empire. Here's what's interesting. While the Nestorians were being slaughtered, Western missionaries were already moving in. Franciscan John of Monte Corvino arrived in 1289 and immediately began competing with Nestorians for converts. Dominican Recold of Monte Croce went to Baghdad specifically to dispute with the Nestorians. The Western churches had maintained careful distance from the actual violence, but they were ready to claim the territory. Think about the timeline. Western churches spent 35 years building relationships with the Mongols before Baghdad. They knew about Nestorian influence. They watched as Nestorians became the public face of Christian collaboration with Mongol conquest. They said nothing. And when the backlash came, when the Mongols converted to Islam and turned on the Nestorians, the Western churches were positioned to inherit their mission field. For centuries, Western Christian leaders used the religious artifacts as propaganda tools. Fragments of the true cross carried into battle. The crown of thorns promised to allies. The legend of Prester John, a mythical Christian king in the East, sustained Crusader morale for 400 years, even though he never existed. These weren't just symbols. The search for lost artifacts was a battle cry, and when in possession, these were psychological weapons that motivated armies and shaped geopolitics. When you make yourself useful to empire, you become disposable to empire. When you tie your faith to military conquest, you inherit the enemies of that conquest. The Nestorians thought they were securing their future by allying with the most powerful force on earth. Instead, they signed their own death warrant. And perhaps most chilling, they may have been manipulated into it by rival Christians who understood this calculus perfectly. The Nestorians aren't around to tell their version of events. We have Western chronicles, Orthodox records, Muslim accounts. But the Nestorian perspective? Largely lost when their libraries burned, their monasteries fell, and their scribes died. Which makes you wonder, What other stories have been buried? What other heresies were simply groups that lost the power struggle? In northern Iraq, small communities of Assyrian Christians still practice. In India, ancient churches trace their lineage to Nestorian missionaries. These are the survivors of an empire that once spanned continents. They carry memories of a church most of the world has forgotten. A church that helped destroy Baghdad and was destroyed in turn. These weren't random events. They were part of a pattern stretching across centuries. A pattern of using faith as a weapon, symbols as strategy, and rival denominations as disposable pawns. The game of empires hasn't changed, only the players. This same pattern appears. As the Byzantine Empire crumbles, some sacred relics from Hagia Sophia are moved to monasteries in Pontus. The fear that these relics could be used by the Turks to rally Christian soldiers, to unleash hell by starting a holy war between the Western churches. They knew, control the symbols and you control the narrative. If you found this story shocking, you're not alone. Most people have never heard of the Nestorian Church, despite it being one of the largest Christian denominations in medieval history. That's not an accident, that's by design. So share this video, let's bring forgotten history back to light.